Welcome back, everybody, to the Only Podcast season wrap-up edition. This is Chris Manini, your host, and I'm joined by Austin Smith. This time, fresh off of enjoying a bachelor party in Fort Lauderdale.
Yes, sir.
How,
back. I made it alive.
How was it? How'd it go?
It was a ton of fun.
The most pressing news of the weekend.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody's been dying to know. It was great, man. I would recommend, if you get the chance to schedule any type of event that involves, drinking or just generally not being at work, schedule it for the first weekend of the tournament. I had a wonderful time. I watched more, basketball in the first 4 days of the tournament than I have in several years, which is to say, I think I missed like 2 or 3 games the entire 4-day span. So it was phenomenal. And it was great because Michigan State was able to, make it past just the first day. So they didn't even play Kansas until I got back to Chicago, which was wonderful. So I was in a great mood the whole time.
Well, maybe that's why they lost. Maybe you should have stayed there.
Maybe I should go back. I'm okay with that. If they're willing to replay the game, I will go back to South Florida. That's fine.
Yeah, I guess it was nice that they were almost the last game on Friday.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of basketball you could watch before you had any feelings about how they did. They made the final, 36 before they even played or something like that.
Yeah, they were they were the 9-10 game on Friday night. I think there were only 1 or 2 games that started after it. It worked out for me personally, worked out about as well as I could have possibly asked for. And I think having that game late on the Friday is always the ideal spot. Like you said, it's the maximum enjoyment before you really have to invest yourself in the tournament and potentially be let down.
In 2011, me and Jeremy Warnamundi covered the tournament for the State News, and MSU played. I think they were one of the first games. Maybe they were the first night. I don't remember what time of day it was, but they were the first day of games, and we had. The paper had booked the hotel for like 4 days or something because they couldn't do it by day, so we had to do 4 days in case they won, and they didn't. So we had 3 days after they lost to just hang around Tampa.
Okay.
And although we didn't have a rental car, they didn't give us a rental car. So we ended up just going to the Hooters, like that was next to the hotel, for like 3 straight days and just watch a bunch of basketball. So
there are worse places to have to spend an extended period of unexpected time than Florida.
It's kind of along the lines of you got to enjoy a lot before anything actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're in Fort Lauderdale. Were there any Miami fans?
No, but there were actually. I didn't notice any Miami fans. I'll be completely honest, none. And Fort Lauderdale is all of half an hour from Miami, 40 minutes maybe, if that. But I did. This is actually a good segue. I ran into former Michigan State running back Lorenzo White, and actually watched the game with him on Saturday night or Friday night, I should say. It was so funny. I was with the guy whose bachelor party it was. His name is Jacob. He's from Lansing. Originally went to Lansing Catholic. I guess that's high school. Grew up a Michigan State fan. He's got a bunch of the buddies. The moral of the story is a bunch of the buddies that I was there with, a bunch of his friends, Lansing guys, are diehard Spartans, just like you and I. So they recognize the faces that maybe a casual Spartan fan wouldn't recognize. And we're sitting at this little tiki bar on the beach in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm looking the other way, facing the opposite direction, and someone just says, "Hey, that's Lorenzo White." Just completely offhand, so nonchalant, so casual. And I turn around, I'm like, "Oh my God, that is Lorenzo White!" And you couldn't miss him. He's built like a brick house, and he had Michigan State gear on. So he's walking by us, and we all just go, "Spartan dog, Lorenzo White!" And he just immediately starts giving us high fives, and is like, "Oh man, Michigan State guys, blah blah blah." We get into it with him. We ask him where he's going for the game. We're like, "Oh yeah, we're just going to go there." So we ended up watching it with, I think it was actually the alumni party, or like the alumni club of Fort Lauderdale, at this bar called Stingers, which is in like a shopping mall in Fort Lauderdale. But it was fun, man. It was actually great being there with, him and all the other diehard Spartans. And that, the beginning of the game was awful quiet, but then it got pretty rowdy in there as it went on. So it Long way of answering your question. I didn't meet any Miami fans, but I met a lot of Spartans, including a pretty famous one.
I wonder how often he gets recognized. It can't be much.
It can't be all that often. I mean, I honestly, I feel like less of a fan for saying this, but I don't know if I would have been able to place him when I saw him. I would have thought for sure that's an athlete because he's still, I mean, like I said, he's built like a ton of bricks, but it was so funny to see him. I was impressed that the guy just said it so nonchalantly. The guy who picked him out was like, "That's Lorenzo White." Like, oh, okay.
I think I last saw him at one of the Big Ten championship games in Indy. Maybe it was that, or maybe it was a Final Four. I don't remember. I think it was in Indy, but well, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was a nice little twist on the whole weekend. I was not expecting that, but it was pretty funny.
Speaking of South Florida and Michigan State running backs, Cedric Irvin was a high school coach in Miami, and I believe he spent last year at East Carolina, but I think he's going back to be a high school coach. And
then honestly, that's who I was thinking if it was a Michigan State running back that I was going to run into down there would be Ced Irvin, because I knew, like you said, that his whole family's down there and he's lived down there for a while. So, but yeah, we got the Lorenzo White surprise, so that was pretty sweet.
So, all right, well, let's get into the reason that people are listening to this podcast, if they are still listening to this podcast. So the Kansas game. Austin, you weren't here. We did the recap, the Miami recap with Adam. I don't think any much more needs to be said other than it was a near perfect performance outside of the first 8 minutes or so. But so they come into this game with Kansas, hanging in it for a while. Ends up being a 20-point deficit, which is kind of weird. Like it was not a 20-point game. I mean, they just blew it open in the final 5 or so minutes. But it was a game MSU led in the first half. They were within one deep into the second half, and then eventually just kind of ran out of steam. Miles Bridges was playing hurt after taking an elbow to the hip or something like that. MSU struggled to rebound the ball. They struggled to defend the Kansas guards, which we said were going to be a huge key. So all in all, I mean, bottom line, I just thought they were outmatched as we kind of expected coming in. What did you think of the Kansas game?
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it with the this did not feel like a 20-point loss, at all.
I looked up and I was like, wait, they're down by that much now? It was just like 7 points a minute ago.
They did a good job of hanging in there up until I think they were within 5 with 7 minutes to go in this game. I mean, was that after the technical foul or something like that? No, that was actually before that.
Okay.
But they cut it to 5 on, I think, a Langford 2. I was looking at this last night when I was writing the recap, and I mean, they were right there. They took a lot of big Kansas punches, took some runs. I mean, at the end of the first half, Kansas got up by 10 or 11. Spartans fought back, cut it to 5 or 6 at half, and even took the lead or cut it to within 1 early in the second half. I think you saw a lot of maturity and growth from the young guys in terms of their ability to take a punch. I think a lot of those close games down the stretch probably helped them there. But like you said, in the last 7 minutes, this turned into the 1-9 matchup that it truly was. Kansas guards just got loose and they started knocking down those shots. Devontae Graham hit several threes down the stretch. Josh Jackson made some incredible plays. I mean, would have been nice to have that guy on the roster this year, but he was making plays for Kansas all day. I actually thought they did a decent job on Frank Mason in this game, despite him ending up with 20 points. He had to work really hard for those 20, and a lot came at the line.
That's the thing. A couple pieces to touch on there. They were within 5 with 7:16 to go after a McQuaid 3-pointer.
That was a McQuaid 3, okay.
And it was right after that. It looks like right after that was the technical foul.
Okay.
It looks like it. No. I'm sorry. No, it's not.
Because that was off a dunk. Lagerald Vick had the dunk and then started He must have said something there, by the way, because he didn't.
Yeah, that was
touch.
I think all MSU fans agreed that was really lame.
To call. That was a tough one.
But okay, so Josh Jackson, he misses a dunk in the opening moments of the game, which it was a funny looking missed dunk. It wasn't like the off the backboard it flies out. It was just a stuffed by the front rim thing. Coming off of the Michigan game, in which Louisville guy missed a dunk too. It was kind of funny on that. But then he just hit some shots that if you're MSU, you live with them. He took some 1-2s, some fadeaways, some step back, some deep step back threes. Like those are you give him those shots. Those are not smart shots, but he made them. So he's going to be playing in the NBA probably next year, and for good reason. But there's not much more you could do to defend a lot of those buckets that Jackson got. So some of that's just you live with it. Kansas's shot selection overall was not good. I was not very impressed with their offense outside of just running a weave, isolation, and drive. Like there was not much to their offense. It didn't feel like. The problem was they couldn't stop the drives without fouling. And yeah, Frank Mason 6 for 16 shooting, but 8 for 8 from the free throw line. He just kept driving, and MSU had nobody who could stop him. They tried McQuaid, they tried Ellis. They just didn't have anybody who could prevent them from getting to the hoop, and that's why MSU. That's why that's kind of what Kansas offense did, and we knew Frank Mason was going to do that. He actually went 0 for 4 from deep, while Devontae Graham went 4 for 6 from deep. But it was just they didn't have any defensive stoppers at guard that could slow him down. And while Mason's numbers weren't great, and his box score number may not be very impressive, I thought defensively that was MSU's biggest problem. They couldn't stop him from getting to the hoop. Kansas went 8 for 20 from 3, and every game we talk about perimeter defense being a key, and it's not just whether or not you allow 3-pointers. It's whether you're pressuring guys on passes or whether you're allowing them to drive by you and get to the hoop, and that's what Mason was able to do.
Yeah, and that was a problem. I mean, even I have talked about this how many times. It was a problem for them all season. And when you play a team that essentially runs 4 guards in their starting lineup, probably one of which for sure is going to go to the NBA this year. Frank Mason is arguably the player of the year. Devontae Graham is no slouch. And Svi Mykhailiuk was their second best 3-point shooter, and is 6'8". That's a tough matchup for MSU on the perimeter.
Yeah, only had 9 points and 1 for 3 from deep. I thought they didn't take advantage of that matchup that they had. I mean, they ended up scoring 90 points, and it worked out in the end. But
Mason, Graham, and Jackson combined for 71 on their own, and it looks like they took 42 shots between the 3 of them. So it's not like there's a ton to go around after those 3 are done. So, but I agree with you. I thought Mykhailiuk was a pretty good, and you saw it. I thought he was pretty physical. He went to the basket a couple times and completed. He is on the end of at least one dunk. I think he did a good job defensively too. He did a decent job on Michigan State's guards. And if you go to the flip side of the guard argument, what MSU's guards were able to do offensively, it was okay. Ellis didn't have a good game, did not go out on a pretty note. I thought Josh Langford has, I don't want to say he has the highest ceiling, because I think Cassius Winston probably has the highest ceiling, but Josh Langford is such a huge X factor. And you could see it today that it's all mental, or yesterday, I should say, Sunday. It's all mental with him. It's confidence in his stroke. And yeah, he only had 10 points. He only went 4 for 9 from the field, but he looked as confident as he has all season putting up some of those shots. And Kansas,
both games.
I agree, in both games. And Kansas in the second half, actually kind of in the first half too, they started, every time they pushed that lead out to 7 or 9, it felt like, now I can't back this up because I don't have, the game tape in front of me, but
I do.
It felt like every time they pushed the lead out, it was Langford that was coming back and making a big shot.
Yeah, I thought you were going to talk about something else, but no, yeah, I think I think he's going to have a huge sophomore year because I
agree.
don't know if we talked about this. We might have talked about it with Adam, but Langford we didn't know what his role was kind of
Right.
as they got into Big Ten play. Like, what is he? Is he a shooter? He doesn't shoot very much. Is he a cutter? He doesn't do much of that. Toward the end of the year, he became a shooter.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a huge asset going forward. We'll talk later about next year and all that, but he really came into himself down this final stretch here when Aaron Harris went out, and he's not afraid to take long twos, and those are not great shots. And when he takes them, you're like, yeah, I don't know if it's a shot, but he seems to be making them. And yeah, Miami game, he hit several shots in a row in the second half to break the game open. In Kansas game, he kept them close for a while. You know what this game was, though, and it's a game that we had thought about before it even happened, was the 2007 North Carolina game. Last time MSU was a 9 seed. They beat Marquette, and then they play number 1 North Carolina. They keep it close for a while. Looking at I was looking through the box score of that game. MSU actually led that game by 3 with 9 minutes left. They were down by 1 with 5:40 left, and then they ended up losing by 14 points and just fizzled out at the end. And that's kind of what happened in this game.
Yeah,
they were just outmatched. And in that game, Tyler Hansbrough had 33 points, 10 for 17 shooting, and just kind of a team that's not only more talented but more experienced.
I think the experience had a lot to do with it. Obviously Josh Jackson aside, there was a lot of experience in terms of the guys that play for Kansas. I mean, Graham, I think is Graham a junior. Frank Mason's a senior.
Mason's a senior. Graham's a junior. Lucas is a senior. Mihalik is a junior.
Yeah, I mean, really, outside of Jackson, everybody that plays for them, I don't know what LeGerald Vick is. I think he's a sophomore or a junior. Okay, so that alone, you're relying on, albeit a phenomenal freshman, you're still only relying on one true freshman.
It's a 7-man rotation, and only one's a freshman.
Yeah. Whereas if you look at Michigan State, it's a deeper rotation, sure, but 4 of them are true freshmen, and really, of the guys that were still playing down the stretch that were healthy,
and they scored 68 of the points, right? 68 of the 70 points, I believe.
Yeah, the only 3 that were in double digits were Ward, Langford, and Bridges.
The only wait, that can't be right. It's not 68 of 70 because
and they ended up with 45 points in this one. 45 of 70 from the 3 starters, and then Bridges, and then Winston had 7. So I guess.
Oh, that okay.
52.
Yeah, I don't know.
Still, 52 out of 70 points coming out of true freshmen. That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, that's what it's been all year, and
it is.
But I think they also kind of came into their own, and they finally grew into what I think we thought they could be. Even though they lost to Illinois, they lost to Maryland, but those were games right down to the very end. And I think you kind of saw what this team could be by the end. They were just outmatched and had the deficiencies that we talked about all year.
Right.
That they were able to overcome. But Bridges developed into, I think, all around. He finished how many straight games did he have double-digit points at the end of the year?
A lot.
He became very consistent. Ward kind of got out of a slump he had at some point in Big Ten play. Winston, same deal with him, and Langford stepped up toward the end of the year and became the shooter that they needed him to be, and I think that bodes well for them down in the future. Now, what about inside? Nick Ward finishes 5 for 9. He ended up getting in foul trouble, which was not a fan of Izzo pulling him when he did. I'm trying to see when that was, because his 4th foul came with 8:38 to go. They were down by 8, and that quickly went to 10. They cut it back to 8. By the time Ward came back in, they were down 12 with 5:40 to go. They cut it to 10, but they would not get any closer than that. I just thought there's no point in saving him because the game's already teetering on the edge of getting out of hand. Taking him out increases the odds of it getting out of hand, and it didn't get out of hand. But they didn't make up ground. They lost a little bit of ground, and they lost time, and 2 things they couldn't afford it. And Ward didn't play much in the first half. I think he only had 3 shots or something like that. Or maybe I'm mixing that up with the Miami game. Do you remember? Did Ward not play much in the first half?
I think he played a decent amount. I mean, he only played 20 minutes for the whole game. So I don't think he played, more than half of the first half. But I didn't notice him being out for like crazy long stretches or anything like that, but I could be misremembering. I thought benching him at that point is really risky. It is in line with what Izzo's done all year, but that doesn't make it the right decision just because it's what he's been doing all year. Again, I think we made this point the last time I was on the podcast. I know you tweeted about it a little bit, but I was a little, we had said before that had someone been coaching for their job this year, had it been a younger coach or a guy with a less, less job security, that the rotation would have ended up looking a lot different. Now, that all is all fine and dandy for the regular season, but having Izzo not adjust to the urgency of the situation was a little disappointing to me personally. And
sometimes it's even little. So they get the ball with like 30 seconds left or 25 seconds left in the first half, and they have Goins and Nairn in the game.
I noticed that.
And neither of them were in Nairn might have had 2 fouls. Right? I don't think either of them were in foul. Ward or Winston were in foul trouble. And shot clock's off. You're not going to have to play defensive possession. Why are they in there? Now, they fumble the ball, nearly turn it over, and then ball goes out of bounds. They put Ward in, and Bridges gets the free throws out of it. So they end up getting 3 points out of it. But I just feel like they didn't maximize the probability of the situation there.
No, I agree. And I think this is one of the first years, every fan base has their nitpicking with the coach and his rotation. But I think a lot of Spartan fans, annoyances with Izzo's rotation this year are pretty justified because of what you're saying. It's maximizing the rotation. It's maximizing situations. Like the end of the Illinois game when Ward's not in there.
Why
is Tum Tum in? Like Tum
right.
It doesn't matter. I think sometimes what Izzo didn't do a great job of this year was prioritizing. It's like situational awareness. Like you said, why are 2 complete and total offensive liabilities in the game in what could be a big swing moment at the end of a half? It ended up being that, but it was because Bridges gets bailed out on a 3 and gets fouled and hit the 3 free throws before the half. At the end of the Illinois game, it ended up being Tum Tum taking the shot. That's maybe literally the last guy you want taking a jumper in a crucial situation like that, aside from maybe Kenny Goins. It just was it gets to be, or it had been last season, and this is all in the past now, which is nice, I think. But there were some spotty parts this season to that rotation, especially in this game. I agree with you about Ward. I think he should. You just let him play with 4 fouls, and you ride it out. I don't know what other choice you really have late in the second half, but Izzo didn't do that.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of coaches would do that. The problem with any auto bench situation is if you get him to the end of the game and he doesn't foul out, then you've wasted minutes. It doesn't carry over.
Right.
You want to maximize the amount of time he's on the floor. Now Ward does have a very high fouls drawn per 40 minutes. I think it's 5.
Yes, he does.
He's gotten in foul trouble a lot. With 2 fouls in the first half. I get there are plenty of situations. I understand the idea that Nairn and Goins you think are much better on defense, and there are other things we don't notice that they do better. But it's a couple of situations, like 30 seconds to go in the first half of a game of a second round NCAA tournament game where it's win or go home, and they're not in foul trouble. Why are they not in the game? Do they not run the specific set as well? Possibly, but I just feel like the drop off offensively between Ward and Winston to Nairn and Goins is so big that when you need a bucket, you gotta do it. They were down 4 to Illinois with 3 minutes left, and they don't have either of those 2 guys in there. And Bridges ends up hitting a 3 to bail them out, and so you don't notice as much. But it's just it's little things like that. And so let's take that into this next thing, and kind of hinted on it. Did Izzo maximize the potential of this team? John Rothstein from FanRag tweeted that Izzo maxed out, squeezed everything he could out of this team. And as a whole, you see 4 freshmen, what they lost, second-round loss to Kansas, and it ain't bad. But do you think that they maximized this specific team?
No, I don't. But I also don't know if that was necessarily the right thing for them to do per se. Like I said, I think it's a situational thing. I think it's because Izzo understands where his program is at, what the expectations are moving forward, and the fact that a lot of these guys involved are going to be a part of that next step, or at least the core of Langford, Winston, and Ward. If you look at this year in a vacuum, no, I don't think there's any way you can say that he maximized the rotation. You can't get this many minutes for Kenny Goins in place of Nick Ward for long stretches and say that he maximized what he had. I think if you were looking at this from, like I've said before, a different coach's perspective, if you were looking at it like this is the year we got to go win as many games as we can this year, forget the future, we're trying to win in 2017 for good, for better, or for worse, the rotation would have looked so much different. Langford, Winston, Ward, obviously Bridges, those guys would have played significantly more minutes significantly earlier in the season. I think it's better for them long-term in their development with what Izzo kind of did, letting them ease in, letting them find their identities, not putting all the pressure on them right away. Results be damned. But no, I don't think you can say that he squeezed every single ounce he could have out of this particular team.
You knew going into the year that it was going to be somewhat of a transitional year. Maybe They have a chance at the Big Ten, but this wasn't a national championship team like last year. The seniors you had were Van Dyke, Harris, and Ellis. And then when Harris went down, I think you really kind of knew, okay, you kind of gotta, this team's not going to go very far. And Izzo has never been a guy to hand the reins to freshmen and let them just go and figure it out, because he's always looked at the program and how it always works. It's not a North Carolina, it's not a Duke, it's not a Kentucky where you can just get freshmen and say you figure it, throw them on the floor and say you figure it out. Izzo runs a much more regimented system, especially offensively, than a North Carolina and a Roy Williams. But he also demands a heck of a lot more and puts a lot more stock into what you do on defense. And that's the hardest thing, I think, for freshmen to often figure out. And you could, Winston and Langford very much struggle at defense at times, and that's a big reason why they were sat down as much as they were. So I think part of what Izzo wanted was to teach them lessons for this year, for next year, for future, for life. I mean, that's kind of how he always does it, and it's always worked out for him. So I don't think he maxed out this team. I think they met the minimum expectations once we kind of figured out what this team is, but I think what he did is going to pay dividends next year.
Yeah.
And in the future and down the road, even if they lose a Miles Bridges, I think Izzo Bridges is a once in a long time talent that no matter what you do, he's going to. And Izzo did give a lot of leeway to Bridges, because I do think Bridges got it quicker than the other guys did. You could always tell seeing them that Izzo and Bridges had a good relationship. I think I've compared it to Gary Harris before as it comes to star freshman players. So did he max out this year's team? I don't think so, but I think it's going to help for next year. So on that note, expectations, what were your expectations beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year? They seem to really change because we didn't know what this team was. So do you think they met expectations, and what were your expectations?
So once Schilling and Carter went down, my expectations were kind of in flux, frankly. I always expected to make the tournament. I don't think there were moments where that was very much in doubt. They were 12-9 at one point. They barely survived against Minnesota. We talked about that before when they were down by double digits in the second half. That was a moment when my stomach started to get a little queasy, thinking this might not happen this year. My expectations, I would say, were to make the tournament. And in that regard, they not only met, but exceeded expectations by advancing to the second round. I don't know that I ever necessarily changed my expectations from that, but my confidence level in them meeting those expectations absolutely wavered, especially after Aaron Harris went down. Like, say what you want about him. I have my own reservations and complaints about him as a player, not being aggressive as a senior, not being the guy to take over when this team really needed him. But he was still a double-digit scorer. He was still an effective defender. He was still another body on a team that needed bodies. And when he went down, that Michigan State was in a tough spot at that point. They were not for sure in. They were in need of a player like him, and to have him go down, be your senior leader, your vocal leader, that got a bit dicey. It's hard to say about a program like the one that Michigan State has and the one Tom Izzo has created that 20-15, a 9 seed going out in the first weekend of the tournament is, quote unquote, meeting expectations. But when you consider the 3 guys that they lost, the departures that they had from a year ago, and the fact that they just survived a month-long Miles Bridges injury, which was well-timed as far as injuries go. But that is an awful lot of adversity to throw at a team that is led by freshmen in a program that is not normally led by freshmen. So really, it's going to be easier to say as we get further from this year, I think. And in the moment right now, it sort of feels like that was a letdown of a year. But if you really want to feel better about it, look at last year's roster, look at this year's roster, and just realize how far down that level of talent, maybe not level of talent, but just in terms of experience and know-how, and a team that last year's team is a team that Tom Izzo thrives coaching. Experience, shooting, toughness on the boards. This year's team was youth, not great shooting, very little height and ability to compete on the boards. And they still made the second round of the tournament. I mean, also think about the fact, if you really want to get, take it to the next level, Northwestern made the second round of the tournament and they were throwing a parade. Like, I've never seen a fan base so excited, and it felt good for them, and I was rooting for them. But Michigan State was 1 seed line down, lost in the second round, and everyone's kind of like, nah, did we even meet expectations? So the standards are lofty, but I feel like ultimately, all things considered, yes, they met the baseline of expectations, maybe even exceeded them a little bit.
You mentioned last year. I think last year was Izzo's second best team behind the championship.
Tough to argue.
I would put it ahead of, in terms of just ability and potential. I think I would put it against the 2009 team that won. Obviously, 2009 went to the national championship game, but in terms of overall talent up and down the board, what they could do, I think last year's team was the second best team, and that's why it had to hurt so much for MSU fans and for Izzo and for everybody involved in that. So expectations at the end of last year, after that loss, when there's a chance Deonta Davis could come back, when you think you have a chance at Josh Jackson, expectation, people were thinking Final Four because there was a lot of potential. You lose Deonta Davis, you don't get Josh Jackson. Schilling and Ben Carter both go down, and you have a massive hole in the middle, and you don't know what these freshmen are. the expectations change. They entered the year number 14 in KenPom, but that did not account for the losses of Schilling and Carter, who are not star players. Michigan fans got super riled up at me on Twitter when I said that having Gavin Schilling in the middle next year would make things so much easier for them. Again, they went from would-be senior and a graduate transfer, two very experienced guys, to a walk-on. Is he a sophomore or is he a junior?
Sophomore.
Former walk-on sophomore, 6'6", Kenny Goins at a center.
In high heels.
He did the best he could. I think you tweeted he deserved a medal for what he had to go through.
He does, man.
He was just overmatched because he's just limited. That's how he is. That's just what the situation was. To go from having two seniors at center to a power forward. He's not even Kenny Goins is not a center either, by the way. He's a power forward. To go from two senior centers to zero centers is a massive loss. This wasn't like going from a great player it wasn't even like going from a great player to a Colby Wallenman. You had nothing there. There was nothing. So then you have Nick Ward had to basically got it on the fly, and he turned into a great player. But he's not he's sort of a center. He's not quite a power forward. He's undersized to be a center, but he did the best he could. But behind him there was nothing. Goins did the best he could, but he was always just meant to eat minutes and hope he could play enough defense. So when those guys went down, the expectations changed. So they start off at 14 in KenPom. A month into the season, they're in the 30s. And that's, early on, expectations change. Maybe beginning of the year, you think, maybe Sweet 16. At the Arizona game, they could play close. Or maybe Sweet 16 is where they could go. Then they struggled through the non-conference. Then they struggled through early Big Ten play. They're sitting at 12-9 after the home loss to Purdue. And then you're thinking, okay, expectations are just make the tournament. That expectations changed. And once we started to think we knew what this team was and saw just how many flaws that they actually had, they were at 52. They go down to 55, and they hovered around the 50s for the rest of the season. After beating Penn State, they jumped from 50 to 43. By the time the Miami game comes around, 42. They whoop Miami. They get all the way back up to 35 in KenPom, the highest they've been since mid-December. They lose to Kansas. They drop back to 39. So they'll end up in the low or high, whatever, 30s, which I think is about right. That's about where they were mid-December when the expectations were, they'll make the tournament. Maybe they'll win a game, maybe two. And that's where they ended up. So I think if the expectations changed because we didn't know what they were and because we realized just how much of a massive loss losing your only two centers was. So I think they met the adjusted expectations. They didn't meet preseason expectations, but they were never going to meet preseason expectations once we figured out what the team was. So, people say preseason polls don't matter, yet they also use that to say, did you meet expectations? I don't know. I think this year it was not any sort of step back. It turned into a transitional year where they did what they needed to do and they didn't lose any ground as a program, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either. I think anybody who truly understands,
like the football team, they lost ground. They lost a lot of ground. This was not the basketball team, when they were 12-9, we didn't know which way they were going to go. They ended up meeting the minimum goal, preventing any sort of loss from this program.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone who truly understands the scope, like you said, of what's happened in the last calendar year, like you said, think about where we were at the end of the first weekend last year. Deontay Davis was almost still a part of things. You were potentially talking about, just to touch on that, the point you made about the front court. In terms of your power forwards and centers, quote unquote power forwards, which is basically what Josh Jackson ended up playing, was like a stretch wing. You were looking at potentially a group of Deontay Davis, Nick Ward, Miles Bridges, Josh Jackson, and Gavin Schilling. Like those were your guys theoretically that were like your 6'7" and above playing big at the 4 and 5. Now I realize that Jackson and Bridges are both more wings, but like that's really where they would have played in a 4-out 1-in type of situation. And instead, you get to actual games and you're looking at Bridges, Ward, and Kenny Goins. It's just such a monumental letdown. So to think that they were ever going to meet those expectations to now is crazy. And I think anybody who understands really what this team went through in the last year and just how much shuffling took place wouldn't ever call this season a disappointment. I think maybe in the grand scheme of a program, it's certainly subpar, but you have to think about the context of the entire thing. And Kenny Goins is so ill-equipped to do what he did this year. He played as out of position as you've ever seen a Michigan State player have to play. 6'6" on his tiptoes, probably.
He's like 230 too.
230. I mean, he's slim. He's not like a hard body 230 either. Like, this is not a big dude, and he's guarding Isaac Haas. He was checking Swanigan. He's checking big centers on all these other teams. It's just. I do think he deserves some type. I hope he got. I don't know if he
deserves a hug. He deserves a hug.
Oh my gosh, he is going to spend the next month in the cold tub, and it's going to be the best month he's had in a really long time. Because at one point in the year, it looked like he was being held together with like Scotch tape. He had that knee braces on both knees, the nose, the face mask, the Rip Hamilton face mask. He got beat up this year. And it's funny, another player, like you mentioned, that they lost from last year, they could have, and I can't believe this sentence is a real valid sentence, but they could have really used Colby Wallenman this year. Just as a guy who's 6'9". I mean, that's it.
Yeah, you know who else they could have used, though? Okay, so I was looking at last year's roster, and I totally forgot to mention this. You know how many guys they lost from last year's team? They lost 8 guys.
A ton.
Denzel Valentine, Matt Costello, Bryn Forbes, Deontay Davis, who are all star players for
pros.
Gavin Schilling goes down with the injury. If you want to count him, that's 5. Wallenman is 6. And then something we didn't mention: the transfers of Javon Bess and Marvin Clark.
Absolutely.
6'5", 6'6". Those are some wing players for you. They lost 8 guys from last year's team. And what happens if you throw Gavin Schilling, Javon Bess, and Marvin Clark on this team? It's
something.
I mean, scholarships would have to be moved around a little bit. It'd be a little bit different, but it'd be a completely different team. And another thing, I mentioned it earlier today on Twitter. Kenny Kaminsky would have been a senior this year.
Those are 3 really nice players that would have. That's the difference, though, when you look at this team as opposed to some others.
I don't think we realize just how much roster turnover there has been in the past 4 years, whether it's guys transferring, whether it's guys getting kicked off the team like Kaminsky did. Kaminsky shot 49% from 3 as a freshman. And
he would have been a phenomenal resource to have.
A big man who could shoot threes. He was such a weapon, but he just could not keep his stuff together, and Izzo had to move on from him. And because I was thinking about that, because Ellis was the only senior left by the end of the year. And it's okay, so it's 9 players if you want to count the injury to Aaron Harris at the end of the year. So, you think about guys who have lost. Why was Ellis the only senior left? Well, that's why, because they lost. I mean, Bess and Clark would have been juniors, but you talk about when there's no veteran barely on this team. That's because they've all left the program almost.
Yeah, and it's a program that, generally speaking, I mean, like we said, Izzo's best programs, or best years, best seasons, are the ones built on back-to-back-to-back solid recruiting classes, built on that experience, built on guys knowing the system and understanding how to play together, knowing what it takes to compete on defense, and just the little ins and outs. And this year, all things considered, they did a decent job of growing into that. And I think what's exciting is that the base of the program moving forward and the guys that had to get a lot of those minutes, in a way, it's somewhat similar to the football team, really. Honestly, the 2 seasons have a decent amount of parallels. So much roster turnover, losing a lot of stars, and then freshmen having to play a ton of really important minutes.
Look at all the defensive linemen the football team lost last year.
All over the place. You lost your quarterback, you lost receivers, you lost everything, except the difference is the basketball team had Miles Bridges and Nick Ward, and the football team didn't.
Yes.
So the exciting part, spinning it forward.
So, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
moving forward, with or without Bridges, we'll talk about Bridges' future in a second. Going forward, your thoughts?
Oh, I think the ceiling is the roof, or whatever MJ said for the 2017-18 Spartans. I did a little research today. I was on Spartan Mag on the message boards, kind of looking through some stuff, and I just sort of mapped out all of the, quote unquote cores of all the Big Ten teams moving forward. And I don't really know if there's one that I would rather have than the core of Langford, Ward, and Winston. I didn't add Schilling in there because you can't really fairly add him in coming off of injury. You can't say for sure what he's really going to do, although by all accounts he's going to be a very effective center and bring a defensive presence MSU did not have this year. But having those three players as sophomores moving forward is about as good a core as there is in the Big Ten. I mean, if you look around the conference, every team, and Michigan State's not left out of this conversation if Miles Bridges leaves, but a lot of the other Big Ten powerhouses are losing either a lot of really good players or one really, really good player. If you look at Wisconsin is losing basically everybody but Ethan Happ. Purdue is probably going to lose Biggie Swanigan, although they bring back pretty much everybody else and will be a really good team.
Is Haas a
Haas is a junior this year.
Oh,
which
wow. I did not realize
yeah.
that. I always thought he was a senior.
Yeah. So
no, he's a wait. What year?
I think he's a junior.
No, you're right. Yeah, junior. I was looking at 2015.
So they lose probably just Swanigan. I don't think any of their big contributors are seniors. I mean, sure, Vince Edwards tested the waters last year, could go again.
Yeah, their only senior, Purdue's only senior is Spike Albrecht.
Michigan is going to lose at least Walton and Irvin and Duncan Robinson, if I remember correctly. And DJ Wilson, honestly, could probably go to the pros. He's been really good.
Yeah, that's actually Robinson's only a junior.
Oh, really? Okay.
According to Ken Palm.
Okay.
Yeah, Walton and Irvin and Denal.
I mean,
Wilson's up. I mean, I think Wilson. If I was, I mean, it's hard to see. I know Wilson's got to improve defensively, but he's shown an incredibly high potential.
He's got an NBA offense with that stroke.
Yeah, Adam Zagoria talked to some NBA people who seem to think him and Wagner will wait another year, but with Wilson, I think he's got so much more he hasn't shown yet too.
Sure. But the only other teams that are bringing back, Purdue's going to be really good. Iowa and Penn State are both going to be really good, or not really good, but like they're both going to improve.
I think Iowa's going to be real good.
But if you look at the rest of the teams, it's hard to not think that MSU is going to be.
They'll be up there
between the couple guys they have coming back. Between the progression you would really hope to see out of guys like McQuaid and Arns as rotational people, and getting Schilling back, bringing in Jaren Jackson, bringing Xavier Tillman.
Yeah,
that's a front court rotation.
Right. For those who don't follow, Jaren Jackson's a 5-star power forward, 6'10". Xavier Tillman's a 6'8" power forward, a 4-star recruit. You throw those two in, you throw in Schilling, you got Ward. I don't know if Ben Carter is going to be back. People who seem to know these things seem to think he won't get the 6th year. So
it's going to be tough.
If he doesn't, then they actually, I don't think, have a scholarship open unless he doesn't come back. Because I know they're in the mix for Brian Bowen, who's also could go to Arizona. McCoy is another power forward who could go to Oregon. McCoy's a 5-star player. But as of right now, I don't think they have the scholarship open unless Carter doesn't return. And people seem to think he won't get that 6th year, which is disappointing. It's got to suck for a guy to transfer for your last year to try to get. I mean, he would have gotten a lot of playing time this year.
He would have played a ton this year. Oh my gosh! Even if Schilling was healthy, he would have played a ton.
So that's.
I think the biggest thing.
I'm sorry. You mentioned the core. I agree. Winston. He's already number 2 in the country in assist rate. I don't know how much higher that can go, but I assume the turnovers will go down. Denzel Valentine, every year, assists went up and turnovers went way down. And so you'd expect a similar move from Winston. Langford has turned into quite a sharpshooter, which you'll get your point guard, you get your sharpshooter, and you get your big man. Like, that's a great that's a great core right there to work
Three
with.
really talented players whose games gel together, who have a ton of experience off of after just 1 year. I mean,
Yeah.
that's exciting.
You'll have McQuaid coming off the bench, who's gotten back to, I think, what he can be, which is a shooter from the outside. Kyle Ahrens can play the two or the three now. He doesn't have to be a power forward.
Right.
We don't have to see any Kyle Ahrens, Kenny Goins front courts anymore.
Oh, yes.
That's a 6'6",
That's a
6'5"
thing.
front court going up against Kansas. And Ahrens has shown he shot like 41% on threes from January on. He's a guy who did come in with some recruiting hype a little bit. He hasn't really been able to show it because he's been either not playing last year or completely out of position this year. So you have those two guys who can possibly shoot, and you'll have Nairn as your I think your lone senior. Yeah, he's going to be the only senior other than Greg Roy. Nairn will be the only senior, and he'll be a defensive guy. I think you will probably see a lot of Winston and Nairn backcourts. You saw them from time to time this year, but I mean they're losing Ellis and Harris and not adding anything to the backcourt. Other than, I guess, if you're going to slide Kyle Ahrens over. So I think you might see some more lineups that way because people are like, who's going to start at point guard next year? I would not be surprised if Nairn and Winston both start next year, basically. It might be how they decide to go about that. But, yeah, you've got generally a complete team. This year's team was, I think, number 1 in the country in bench minutes, but it was not talented depth. Next year, I think it'll be a lot more talented depth.
Yeah. I think your minute stealers go back to being minute stealers. Yes. Kenny Goins goes back to being your 5th man in the front court if nothing changes from here on out. I think having Cassius's minutes are going to go way up. Tum Tum, I got to think, is going to – if he can just be Travis Walton and just find some type of little baseline jumper, a little floater – something moving forward. You got to give something. But.
I really did like at times this year when he would race to the basket, and we've talked about it before. And he got swatted to hell several times, including the Kansas game. But it's a spark. It puts pressure on the defense in case they get out of position. It's an emphasis that they're trying to run the ball. Not the worst play in the world. You want him being aggressive. You're okay with him taking that shot. You're not okay with him taking a 3-point shot when the shot clock's running down. So I'm not going to say I think he's going to develop a jump shot because, like Brandon Dawson, this is going to be like 3 off seasons in a row where we're going to say there's going to be a story. There's going to be a story. Nairn's going to work on his jump shot. Here's an Instagram video he took of him hitting like 10 threes in a row. Oh, that's going to be an option. It's not. It's just you don't develop a jump shot for your senior year pretty much. I mean, right. If you can be Travis Walton, hit a couple of shots, floaters, just get in the. He has such good speed to get down the court the way he does. There's something you can do there. I don't think it's going to be jump shot.
Just have to keep defenses somewhat honest. Like just make them think about it. You mentioned him, but I want to talk about Ahrens and McQuaid real quick because I've been down on Matt McQuaid all year. I thought that he's your shooter and he can't really shoot all that well. But I want to cut him some slack because he had double hernia surgery last offseason.
Mm-hmm.
Now
we didn't talk about that much at all.
We didn't. And that was probably that is my fault. I'll take the blame. I was a little too harsh on him, but he's also playing 25 minutes a game and it was more of a confidence thing. I think an off season of being healthy and kind of understanding your role a little bit better will go a really long way for Matt McQuaid. I think he can get back to and improve on what he was as a freshman. He's going to be, and this just speaks to the general rotation, he's going to be he should end up being much more comfortable with his role. He's going to get back to being the shooter off the bench, which I guess he was this year as well, but that's his role. He's going to be able to come off screens and just try to hit some open threes.
He's not going to be tasked with guarding Frank Mason.
Exactly. He's going to go back to the one-dimensional player where he will thrive the most being. And I think in a quick, small tangent, his ability to come off screens is going to get a lot better next year. A, because he's going to be healthy, and B, because of that front court size. Izzo talked about it after the game in like his off podium stuff.
I was going to say, you mentioned you read the Spartan Mag. I don't have a subscription to that. Comp had some very interesting quotes, some of which he tweeted out. Others I couldn't read because they were on the paywall. I think that's where you're getting at.
Yeah, basically he's got Kenny Goins setting a pick for him. A 6'6", 230-pound guy, as opposed to a Gavin Schelling, who is a chiseled 6'9", 240. That's a difference. That's the thing people don't really think about. Do you think guys are really going to be able to fight over picks from Gavin Schelling as easy as they are from, stretch four Kyle Ahrens
or freshman Derek Nick Ward, who
right
to learn that?
I think that's an underratedly huge part of what a renewed front court is going to do for this team. Just the ability to be physical, the ability to get those scrappy rebounds and those easier points, the ability to finish in traffic, the ability to set bigger screens, and more than anything else, the ability to let Tom Izzo actually have a rotation. He doesn't have to play guys out of position. One of the guys who got played the most out of position was Ahrens.
Well, before you get into him, I just wanted to jump in because you're talking about McQuaid before we move on from him. Before this Kansas game, I went back and watched some highlights from last year's Kansas game where they won in the second game of the year. You know who hit when they were up 1 with like a minute left? Valentine drives, dishes to the corner. You know who hits the game-clinching 3? A true freshman, Matt McQuaid. And he had a very good game in that one. And people thought he was going to become a big sharpshooter, and he didn't. And he, like you said, he got hurt, had the surgery. Took a long time to get the confidence back. He seemed to get it back toward the end of the year. And so I think there is that player we saw against Kansas basically 2 years ago, I think is what MSU will hope to be getting now.
Yeah, that surgery is no joke. It's hip surgery for a guy who's supposed to be, using his legs to shoot and coming around screens to get open to shoot and defend the other team's best player. Hip surgery is not a joke. So I just wanted to kind of cut him a little bit of slack. But one guy I'm really bullish on is Ahrens. You saw a lot of flashes of really confident and competent shooting stroke from him. I think as a 2 to 3, he's going to be in a real nice position to steal 10, 12 minutes a game with potentially a larger role as the season wears on next year.
Yeah, he played very confident every time he was in there. He did not look, he'd get the ball. He didn't look like a guy who panicked or didn't want to always take an open shot. He'd look if it was there, he'd take it if he wouldn't. Like I said, I think he shot 41% on threes from mid-January on, and he was, like I said, a pretty talented recruit coming in, more athletic guy than I think we know, and has a shooting ability, and I think he'll be he'll be in position to finally do something. My first thought was him, and maybe it's because he's white, but my thought is Austin Thornton. they're both 6'5", pretty similar builds. And Austin Thornton, when he became a senior, just became an outside shooter, solid outside shooter guy for them. And I could see Ahrens creating a role like that on a team that's not going to have the guard depth that they did this year, but will have guys in better position.
I think he's got a chance to be better than Thornton because he's a better athlete. Thornton gave everything he had, but he was a try-hard guy. I think Ahrens has a chance to really carve out a nice role.
Thornton shot 47% his senior year from 3, 31%.
Oh, absolutely. He was a great shooter. He did everything they asked him to do. I just think that Ahrens, whatever, his ceiling is a little higher just based on athleticism. He should be on the boards a little more.
He was in a dunk contest in high school too.
And he can get up. I mean, I've actually read some things about him that he's one of the better leapers on the whole team. So, you're going against Miles Bridges every day. It's going to be tough to stand out, but I'm bullish. I'm bullish on him moving forward into next year. Everybody just take a deep breath this year. It felt like work sometimes watching this team struggle through the growing pains and the ugly rosters and ugly lineups that they rolled out there. But the future is very bright. I think, for the immediate future is extremely bright for Michigan State.
Yeah, and as opposed to last year where we thought the future was based on potential, I think this year is more based on results and guys who we know what they bring, like Schilling, filling in some space. So guys who will anybody else on this year's team we want to talk about? We talked about the core, the 3 freshmen. We talked about McQuaid. We talked about Aarons. I gotta say I don't follow a ton of recruiting. I couldn't tell you much about Jaren Jackson and Xavier Tillman.
I can jump in there for you.
I'll tell you that they're both power forwards. Jackson 226, Tillman's 270.
Tillman's a big boy.
And I don't know if when I was mentioning the quotes from Comp, there was something from Izzo saying, we're not going to get. I'm going to have a bunch of bigs and I'm going to bully people now or something, or we're not going to get out.
I'm going to beat the hell out of some people.
I didn't read the story. What was the whole? Is it kind of what we assume it was? This will seem pretty confident in what he's got in the front court next year.
Oh yeah, and he should be. Frankly, I watched the video, and they were basically asking. He was sort of giving a bit of a season recap, saying. He's giving Kenny Goins some credit, saying he went out there and battled like hell, and that Miles Bridges with the hip pointer in that game battled like hell on the boards, and he was forced to play some lineups he didn't love all season. They just couldn't really compete due to the lack of the physical, size of the team. But yeah, moving forward, he said 2 things. He said we're gonna beat the hell out of some people. There's gonna be some payback there, and 2, the second thing he said was we're never gonna get out rebounded again. And I think if you look at assume Ben Carter's gone. If he's back, the case gets even stronger. But that front court is going to be significantly improved. In terms of the 2 freshmen that are coming in, well, let's just look at what we got. Nick Ward, what he brings to the table. Great rebounder, got the size. I think when he has another big boy down there next to him, he's going to have a better time not fouling as much and will distract maybe some of the other bigs away from him. So he might actually become a better, more effective rebounder. Gavin Schilling is a brick house. Got to think if he is relatively healthy, which he should be at that point, because you'll be a good year and a half away from when he had surgery and all that. That's a huge plus. And then the 2 freshmen that they have coming in, Jaren Jackson and Xavier Tillman, are very different, but they bring aspects that MSU hasn't had in big men in a while. Jaren Jackson is the number 10 overall player on Rivals. He's a stud. It's a low stroke, but he can nail threes. He's the type of stretch forward that it's like an Adrian Payne-ish.
I was going to say, that was my first thought. Payne could always hit the threes, but Izzo would not let him shoot. And he wouldn't shoot because he'd get pulled if he did until toward the end of his junior year. He started shooting some threes. He started making them. And then he just got to keep doing it because he kept making them, and that went into a great senior year he had. So I don't know if Jackson will be allowed to shoot. Well, he apparently has that.
He's got the stroke.
Same with Costello. Matt Costello could always shoot, but never really got to do it until his senior year.
I think that Jackson's offensive game is more refined than either of their 2 when they were coming into school. And Payne also, for as much as he could shoot, that jump shot took an hour and a half for him to get off.
Yeah, but who was going to block it, though?
Hey, listen, I'm not arguing. Adrian Payne is one of my favorite Spartans of all time. I'm at the forefront of the bandwagon. But Jaren Jackson, in terms of refinement coming into college, is significantly ahead of where either of them were. I think he could have a Nick Ward-ish impact on the team next year. Tillman, if they were to either get Brandon McCoy or have Ben Carter come back, I wouldn't be surprised if they redshirted Tillman as like a luxury. But if they can't, he's more than ready to play. Size alone will allow him to steal 10, 12 minutes a game. He's got a less refined offensive game, although his jumper has significantly improved in the last year. Since his junior year, he was just the runner-up for Mr. Basketball behind Isaiah Livers, who's going to Michigan. That's a good player. And if they have to play him as a 4th big or a 3rd, 4th big, MSU's going to have some beef. I actually wouldn't be surprised next year if they flirt with playing, like you said, if Izzo trusts him as much as a shooter, if they flirt with playing Jaren Jackson a little bit at the 3, I will not be that surprised if they try to go if Izzo's intent on winning the rebounding battle and going big and beating the hell out of some people, a 6'9" small forward who can stroke would be a nice addition to the core. So don't be surprised about that. I mean, I don't think we've barely talked recruiting at all for next year. Jaren Jackson is a reason to be extremely excited about next year's team. He's a higher rated recruit in his class than Winston or Langford were, and he's right around the same area where Bridges ended up in terms of overall player. He's going to be good.
So you mentioned the rebounding. We never really talked about it. I kind of wanted to wait till the final season numbers were in. You can make the case this is the worst rebounding team of the last 15 years for Izzo. Ken Pom goes back to 2002, so I can't speak to anything before that. But this was their second worst offensive rebounding team since 2004. 2004, they were number 217th. This year they were 183rd.
Not great.
Actually, yeah. And then hold on one second. I want to make sure I'm reading these numbers. Actually, looking at it, the number in 2004 was 32.5% of misses. This year was 29.2. So I actually think this is the worst offensive rebounding team they've been ever. And it's not surprising. And then 88th in defensive rebounding, which again is one of the worst that they've had in that entire stretch. So you have not only one of the worst offensive rebounding teams, but also one of the worst defensive rebounding teams. Like, that's just not an Izzo team. And they had one or zero offensive rebounds the first half against Kansas, and just the simple fact that they'll have more second chances next year on possessions is going to do wonders.
Yeah, I think that alone, legitimately, if you just look at that stat improving, forget about shooting better on threes, forget about defending better, just concentrate on the possessions gained by rebounds. And that's going to be, it's going to be absolutely enormous. Every player should be more comfortable with their role. And a sneaky, beautiful thing about having Kenny Goins as your fifth big is that, A, he's your fifth big instead of your second. And B, Izzo can now use him in little tiny stretches to teach those young guys that are coming in, like, give those teaching moments back to him. Because he loves, as soon as a player screws up, he calls them out, tells them what they did wrong, and they sub right back in. Now, instead of Goins having to go in and play 10 minutes in a row because Nick Ward picked up his second foul, you're going to have the ability to throw Jaren Jackson in there. You're going to have the ability to throw Tillman in there. You're going to have the ability to throw Kenny Goins in to steal you a couple minutes because he's going to try hard, and he's probably actually going to have a center at his back that's going to make him a better player and make him less of a defensive liability. So I know it's another year away, but I'm very excited if everything holds up to what that team, legitimately regardless of what happens with the roster from here on out. I think that could be a good team. And there could still be some really good additions between Bowen and McCoy. And I do think they might go after, if they don't get either of them, I think they're going to go after a graduate transfer guard. They could use another guard.
If they don't have Carter, they're going to have a scholarship open. So.
I think they'll go after a grad transfer guard. Actually, there was a grad transfer who got all the approval today, Elijah Brown from New Mexico, who averaged like 19 points a game. That would be a nice guy to go get. So I think another scorer guy who can kind of play the 2 or the 3 would be a really good addition for this team. But like I said, take all that out and you just look at what they've got. It's going to be a damn good team.
What is coming back is probably a Big Ten title contending team.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
The biggest addition that could put them into national championship contender, which is what we'll just about finish up with here, is one Miles Bridges, who appears to be top 15 pick potential based on everybody who knows those things. He said he's going to talk to his mom and Izzo about it. Izzo even seemed to be conceding that he's probably going to tell him to go. I know his dad said he was going to come back. I didn't put a ton of stock in that at the time for several reasons. I found it interesting that Bridges said he was going to talk to his mom and Izzo. It may be a total coincidence he didn't listen that. I don't know the family dynamics going on there. I'm not going to pretend that I do. But I think that was a lot. For those people who are saying, oh, his dad said he's coming back, that gives you hope. I think that meant much anything based on what everybody's saying now. What should you do? I'm not going to tell him what you should do. I don't know situations that different people are in. We talked about it. I think we talked about it earlier a few months back. Gary Harris came back after 1 year, who was a projected first-round pick. Not as projected as high as Bridges is, but he also had a very, very stable financial and family situation. So, he was a guy who, if he had a career-ending injury, people would have been okay. Bridges, I know his mom lives in Flint. There's a lot more going on here than just working on your own game. And personally, I'd rather be getting paid millions of dollars while working on my game than being a college student working on a game. Now, Bridges seemed to love college. He seemed to have a really good relationship with Izzo in the same way Gary Harris did. Not a lot of freshmen have that relationship with Izzo. I think Bridges and Izzo really do. So I don't know which way it's going to go. My guess is going to be no. Personally, I would leave.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to fathom turning down millions of dollars and the chance to play in the NBA. I think that there's just so much that goes into this decision. And as a forefront and a disclaimer, I hope, and I don't think there will be, the way there was a little bit of backlash against Deontay Davis a year ago, I really hope that doesn't happen, because Miles Bridges gave every single thing he had to this team this year, and he has a chance to go live his dream. If he decides to do that, just as a fan, don't be an idiot. Like, just understand that this kid has a chance to be really special, and he's just trying to follow his dreams, make money, take care of his family. I think there's a lot of similarities and also a lot of differences between he and Gary Harris. I think in a lot of ways on the basketball court, it's fairly similar. I mean, Harris had a great freshman year, had a couple of injuries here and there with his shoulder, was projected actually not that much. It was a different draft, but not that much lower than where Bridges is getting mocked right now. Bridges is anywhere between, I think I've seen him as high as maybe 8 or 9 and as low as 12 or 13. So he's right there in the mid to late lottery. Harris was kind of in the same area, ended up slipping a little bit further, but ultimately landed in a great spot in Denver, where he's having a phenomenal,
he's having a really good year,
really good bounce back year after kind of starting a little bit slowly his rookie year. But, Bridges clearly has if you're looking at it strictly from a basketball situation, Bridges clearly has parts of his game that another year in college playing for a coach who was on you every single day could really help him with. Now, him playing in the NBA or the D League or, and making money, he would certainly have a chance to do that there as well. But there are definitely still improvements to be made in his game where Tom Izzo could really help with that. But you got to look at off the court as well. Like you said, Harris had a super stable situation. I don't know as much about Bridges' personal life either. So if he decides to go for his family, then, Godspeed. I hope he has a phenomenal career and makes money and helps everyone that he loves. But it'll be interesting. Like you said, he and Izzo had kind of a special connection, and he's the type. Izzo called him a weirdo in that he doesn't really like to talk about what he's going to do. Izzo said he urged him. Actually, I found this interesting. Izzo said that he urged him several times throughout the season to talk about the issue because he just wanted to clear the air because, you knew people would ask about it. But Bridges didn't want to. He doesn't want to go out. He seems like a pretty he seems like a determined kid to me. Mm-hmm. He's smart. He's calculated. And he seems to want to win. I mean, he's not out there half-assing these things. I think a lot of one-and-dones, a lot of guys who knew they were going to the NBA, if they would have gotten a hit pointer in the middle of that second game that they probably thought they were going to lose to Kansas anyway, probably would have sat down and just called it a day. But Miles Bridges went out there and gave every single thing that he had. So he loves playing with the team. He loves Izzo. He clearly wants to win. I think he loves being a Spartan. So that makes me think he could come back. But then there's also would you rather make millions of dollars right now instead of having to take out an insurance policy and really risking that type of injury? So either way, I don't blame him. I think it's it's likely that he goes, but I don't necessarily think it's a 110% done deal.
You know, he'd be allowed to play the 3, which I think he fits better if he does come back. But in terms of if he comes back, it's going to be because he just has a good time and wants to come back.
Yeah, and he wants to win.
Right. It's not going to be, oh, I think I need to work on this on my game. I mean, he needs to refine parts of his game, sure, but he can do everything.
And he has a chance to do it all and get paid next year.
Right.
So
he has shown he can shoot the 3, he can drive, he can pass, he can feed the post. Him and Ward developed a heck of a chemistry this year. He can dunk. He obviously needs to get better on defense and maybe rebounding, but he's got the athletic ability to do it. There's nothing he needs to show he can do. He showed this year that he can do it all. So if he comes back, it's going to be because I want to win a national championship, want a Big Ten championship, and I just like being a college kid. That's what Gary Harris said. He just really liked being in college, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I don't know which way it's going to go. Izzo and Bridges said they talked this week. I imagine I'll say that, you know, a year ago I thought the decision would be pretty quick because Deontay Davis was projected so high, but that ended up dragging out for quite a long time. So I guess I'm not going to say I think there's going to be a quick decision. He can go to the NBA Combine and do stuff and then pull out. The NBA rules are a lot better than football. Where anybody can declare, get feedback, and make a decision. Go to the Combine. Kentucky last year, every single Kentucky player, Calipari had every single player declare for the draft, and
they did it all in one press conference.
Yes, yeah. And then well, I don't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, he announced that everybody was going to do it. You know, work out with teams, get your feedback, and make a decision from there. Really like the way the NBA does that, much better than football. So we may not get a decision on Bridges anytime soon. We may. I mean, you know, maybe he knows the feedback is so good that it just depends on if he wants to or not. So I don't know which way it's going to go, but if it was
always pushes for feedback, and so I think that bare minimum, if he doesn't declare before that Combine, he will be going there. I think Izzo will tell him that he has to go almost, because why not hear it straight from from the teams themselves?
And that's the thing about Davis is that Izzo did not seem shocked that Davis fell to the second round.
No.
Which is interesting because Chad Ford's draft and a lot of the draft boards did not have that happening. So Izzo knows people who seem to know these things. So that's another thing to keep
definitely.
In mind. If it was the end, if that's the only year we got with Bridges, I think you got plenty of highlights and you got a lot of images of a kid who just seemed to be having a lot of fun out there.
Yeah, he was. This is a hell of a year. If you're going to get 1 year, you can't ask for anything more from him as an individual.
He several times put a very flawed team on his back and is probably the biggest reason, maybe Nick Ward, but him and Nick Ward, the biggest reason that the 20-year tourney streak got kept alive. And for all the dunks and everything he did, if it's the end for Bridges, I think what I'll remember the most of him, I'll ask you after this, but the moment I'll think about the most was at Illinois when he gets subbed out and Izzo's yelling in his face and Bridges goes to grab and hug him. Now, watching on TV, you thought you were hugging him. Apparently, Solari, who was at the game, said Bridges was imitating what Illinois was doing to him defensively. He said they were hugging him or whatever. But it's just a funny image because he goes to hug him. Izzo pulls back and goes, "Oh, don't give me that bullshit," or something like that.
Yeah.
and then they talk, they go back and forth, and then they kind of dap, and they're all good as he goes to the bench. I thought that perfectly summed up their relationship. Izzo could be very hard on Bridges, and most freshmen cannot take it from Izzo. Bridges saw the big picture. He knew what it was about. He knew that Izzo had his best interest at heart, and I thought it was a very cool way to see the relationship. So that was that. If that's the end for Miles Bridges, that was my favorite Miles Bridges moment. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's probably it. I mean, that was great. I loved everything about that. Like you said, I think it kind of summed up the experience, if it is his only year, sort of in a nutshell, in his relationship with Izzo. And I think at the very least, you have another, like a Draymond Green guy that absolutely sings Tom Izzo's praises in the NBA as a worst case scenario. I think his the putback dunk against Miami was pretty wild, where he basically went over two different guys and followed up on that rebound. I mean, we've never had, maybe not never. I mean, Brandon Dawson was a heck of an athlete, and so was Jason Richardson. But in terms of just pure fluid, next level athleticism, there just aren't many cut from the same cloth as Miles Bridges. So it's funny coming from a team that was significantly better last year and played together so well, didn't have a guy on the team that it seemed like could dunk besides maybe Deontay Davis. And then to flip over to the next year and get to watch a guy like Bridges throw down dunk after dunk after dunk was pretty fun. And you know what? It just proved that Tom Izzo recruits good kids. He doesn't have many flawed individuals that, I mean, listen, he's had his fair share of malcontents, but
they usually don't make it through.
Right. But it's cool to see a guy come through with all the hype in the world. He could have gone wherever he wanted. I mean, I thought about it the other day. He could have gone to Kentucky, and think about how he would have fit in with Bam Adebayo, Malik Monk, and De'Aaron Fox. I mean, they talk about a perfect fit, but he chose to come home, play for the homeschool program, even though he, might have known that things weren't going to be as flashy and fun, but he did very well for his 1 year as a Spartan. And, if he comes back for another one, I think you're talking about a top 5 preseason team and a team with legitimate national title aspirations if he's a part of the team.
Yeah. And, for a few years there, Izzo struggled on recruiting and missed out on a lot of Plan A guys. And a lot of people wondered if he could still do it. I think Gary Harris was the type of recruit, the kind of the rare type of top recruit that fit Izzo perfectly, and that's why he loved him. I think Jabari Parker was that kind of recruit, and that's why it hurt Izzo so much to not get him. And you look at some of the recruiting classes that included Marvin Clark and Tum Tum Nairn, and he lands Deontay Davis in a 5-star, but then he lands this class, headed by Miles Bridges. I think I think it's a very Tom Izzo class, but with all the talent in the world. And I think Izzo seemed the past few years has seemed to be more rejuvenated on the recruiting trail as opposed to missing out on Cliff Alexander and criticizing the middlemen you have to deal with when recruiting Chicago and that kind of stuff. And even missing out on Josh Jackson. But you look at the class he brought in this year, you look at the class he's got next year. I think he's again finding the type of guys that he thinks fit the program, and I think Miles Bridges fit it better than anybody. Yeah.
Even if Bridges ends up being around for 1 year, he did a great job of helping. I don't want to say reignite because the program never really took a step back, but he helped launch on the recruiting trail, at least, and amongst like the super high ranked freshmen. He helped kind of launch Izzo. I don't know. He helped buoy the team, because really, if he's not around for this year, who knows where this team goes, and who knows if these kids that are 5-star recruits are taking Michigan State as seriously in the future. So to have him be a part of everything and be such a class act during it and make so many highlight plays and potentially be a really visible player at the next level, it was pretty special.
And keep the tournament streak alive and keep the program afloat and set it up for the future. So I think he did a lot more than dunk. So if that's the end of it, if that was a good that's 1 year, it was a good 1 year. I think that is a really enjoyed. Lastly, how's your bracket doing?
Oh man. Well, Duke, I've never been so happy to lose a Final Four team as I was to watch Duke lose. That was fine. I also had, on the complete opposite side of that, I had Louisville in the final. That's not great because they lost to Michigan. Of course, not only did they lose, but they lost to U of M. But my champion's still alive. Arizona's still alive. But, seeing how things are going, I'm sure they'll lose to Xavier in the next round and everything will fall apart. So per usual, not doing great in the bracket. But yeah, how about yours?
When SMU lost, I had SMU in the Final Four.
Oh,
when SMU lost to USC, I thought I was really doomed there. But the fact that the East got crazy, I think will limit those losses. The fact that Villanova and Duke won't come out of it, I think I'll limit my losses there. I only had one of the Sweet 16 teams out of that region, but I think elsewhere I seem to be doing okay. I still have my other Final Four teams: Kansas, Arizona, and UCLA. I have in the Final Four. I had Arizona, Kansas in the title game. So yeah,
You're alive.
I think I'm still alive. So how about that? So and also, is Michigan going to win the national championship?
Oh God, I hope not. I think they've got a chance to make a little run here, though. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I wouldn't be surprised at all if they get to the Final Four.
I mean, if Purdue wins, these next 2 games could be easier than their last 2 games for them. They're 2-0 against Purdue, and they match up well against them. I'd be very curious to see Kansas. I'd be very curious to see Kansas, Michigan, but
Kansas is a tough matchup for them because you got to have DJ Wilson and Wagner. Well, really just DJ Wilson checking Josh Jackson. That's a tough matchup. But it goes 2 ways, though. I
think of Michigan basketball sometimes the same way as I do with maybe the St. Louis Cardinals or somebody else. But like they're never dead until they're like fully dead. Like you can never count them out until like clocks 5 minutes past it reach 0 because they always fight to the absolute end and can always pull stuff out of nowhere. So we'll see where that goes.
Go Oregon. Let's go Ducks. Come on, baby. Save us all from this nightmare.
So I don't know when we're going to be doing another podcast because there may not be much to talk about next week. There has been nothing happening with the football team. The spring game is in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, and I guess I still don't know if that's on.
We'll find out.
So I can't say when I know when the next podcast will be, but if it's the last one for a little bit, thanks guys for listening. Stay subscribed for whenever the next one comes. If there's big news, we'll talk about that. But Austin, I've appreciated you coming aboard for this basketball season and football season, and pretty crazy when you've jumped on board with the podcast. I didn't even realize you were the same dude I went to high school with.
And now here we are talking one of the crazier seasons in Michigan State sports history.
So sorry we had to talk about a lot of losing.
Hopefully we can talk about a lot more winning next year. That would be more fun.
So appreciate guys listening. Always make sure you're always reading stuff on the site. They've added you guys have added some new writers, some good stuff there. Always appreciate all the comments and feedback on everything on the site and elsewhere. And always make sure you're following me on Twitter at Chris Vannini and Austin at ACSmith06. We're always, willing to talk about stuff. So thanks everybody for listening, and we will talk to you sometime later. See ya.